John Hickenlooper's educational degrees, he actually went to Haverford, and then he has a BA in English from Wesleyan, a master's degree in geology, but they were all simply preamble to a more life-altering educational experience. Occurred at the Triple Rock Brewery in California, where he and his brother first tasted the microbrew fad. In the late 1980s, Wynkoop Brewery, where we all were last night and had a great evening, became an expression of that experience and further showcased his skills as an entrepreneur and an innovator. When he started the Wynkoop Brewery, the neighborhood was blighted and dangerous. Building space was $1 a square foot a year. Coyotes and prairie dogs occupied the railroad tracks surrounding Union Station. Fast forward to today and think transformational change. Elected mayor in 2003, re-elected in 2007 with 88% of the vote. John's pro-business sense makes him a popular, pragmatic centrist. Since his election as a governor in 2010, his re-election in 2014, the governor and his team have endeavored to make Colorado a pro-business state that's highly attractive to startups with the highest environmental and ethical standards. As an avid bicyclist myself, I want to express a note of personal appreciation. Last week, the governor announced several $1 million of state highway funds will go to achieving his vision of making Colorado the most bike-friendly state in the country. The governor was scheduled to speak at Fred in San Diego in 2013. On September 6th, I actually saw Al Adams and I were climbing Longs Peak via the Keyhole route. As we descended Longs Peak, it started to rain. That's a treacherous peak to be caught in the rain. There were several people who were behind us who they didn't die, but they didn't make it down for days because the rain didn't stop. It kept coming and it kept coming, and it led to devastating and massive floods. That emergency required Governor Hickenlooper to stay in Colorado and oversee the response. He sent a team. They made a fantastic presentation about leadocracy and linking the private sector and encouraging private sector people into government. We're so pleased to have him here today with us on a relatively sunny day before we set out to explore the leadership stories that await us outside these walls. Please help me welcome a friend of Fred's and the best governor in the country, John Hickenlooper.
I know for a fact, I was just finished being the chair of the National Governors Association, so I know for a fact that 49 other governors would take issue with that, the end of that introduction, but thank you very much. And I am a great friend of Fred, and certainly appreciate what Fred is about, this notion that you can take, inspiration and actually not just talk about things, but do things. It's interesting, this is our 4th Startup Week, and this is a celebration we have in downtown Denver. Denver Startup Week is now yesterday they had 10,000, they went over the 10,000 mark for attendees, of people signing up to be part of this ecosystem for how do you start a business, how do you support other people starting a business. It's become a big deal. It's the largest, it's completely free, it's put on completely by sponsors and by the community. There are literally hundreds of seminars and opportunities for people to kind of learn from each other that are all kind of self-generated. And it's actually a good metaphor for what Denver's done over these last 20 or 30 years. When I opened the Wynkoop, our lease was $1 a square foot per year. We signed that lease in 1987. We opened in 88. 1991, we bought that whole big warehouse for about $11 a square foot. So it really was a wasteland. And what we really did was kind of build on what had already been happening in Denver, but it really came down to getting people to work together and to align their self-interests. And oftentimes people, especially in negotiations, people come in with a very narrow perception of what their self-interest is. I've got to get this to be successful. And yet if you get them to see, well, there are these other things that could happen which would still be pretty good for me. They're not as good as my narrow self-interest, but they're pretty good. And once you get people broadening their self-interest, you suddenly begin to create transactions, you create a vision, and you create collaboration that really is what creates progress. In Colorado in 1984, 85, and then finally in 86 they acted. The civic leaders, the boards of the Denver Art Museum, the zoo, the Museum of Nature and Science, they saw all the people moving into the suburbs. And they recognized that that was going to diminish their capacity to keep their cultural institutions at the top of their game. So in 1986, they went to the ballot, and all the cultural institutions, so the Botanic Gardens, the zoo, the Art Museum, I mean, go down the list, they all shared their mailing lists and united on a region-wide. So all 7 counties, an area almost the size of Connecticut. I mean, Metro Denver region is very large. They passed a 0.1% sales tax for, it's called the SCFD, the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. So now it's up to about $47 million a year that goes to our Performing Arts Center, all these cultural institutions. The result being that the Museum of Nature and Science is the largest museum of nature and science in the United States. It has 65,000 paid memberships, more than any other museum of any kind in the country. The Denver Art Museum is the 4th most visited art museum. The Denver Center for the Performing Arts has more seats and more paid admissions than any other nonprofit theater group in the country. It's the 2nd largest set in terms of seats and facilities, 2nd largest in the United States, 2nd only to the Lincoln Center. The Botanic Gardens is the most visited botanic gardens in North America. You go down, I mean, Denver's 20th in terms of our metropolitan size, and yet we lead in almost every one of these things, and it was through that kind of distinctly Western collaboration, right? The West didn't really get settled without the wagon train. Everyone talks about the pioneer and the rugged individual, but they didn't really settle the West. The West was settled by people coming out on wagon trains, and everyone had their task, and they all worked together, and they created instant communities, literally. They would come to a place, and they would really take on different roles and work together so that they could make sure they had food and shelter and get a foothold in this rather rugged place. As the restaurant, when we got first opened Hickenlooper in 1988, there was nothing. They rolled up the sidewalks at 5 o'clock. And my partners and I looked at it and we said, God, the downtown's really got to be, I mean, it's got to be the key. Denver's got these cultural institutions, it's got a lot going on for it, but where's the heart? Where's the downtown? And I'd grown up back east in Philadelphia. I knew about eastern downtowns. One of my partners grew up in the west, knew about western downtowns, more spread. And we said, we want to be able to create a place where folks can walk to work. And it became a big part, not to create an entertainment district in lower downtown, which had been talked about for many years, but really make it restaurants, but also residential. So we went, you know, I'd never worked, I had a master's in geology, came out in the oil business, so I'd never worked a day in my life in the restaurant business. I'm not quite sure, that's a much longer story than you'd want to hear, how I talked myself or got talked into opening the Hickenlooper. But we did go, we put up signs in our lobby. There were about 6 or 7 other restaurants in lower downtown. That was it in 1988. And so we put up signs advertising some of our competition. And my more experienced employees said, Hick, you're nuts. You can't, I mean, this is a dog-eat-dog business. You can't market the competition. And I said, well, maybe they're not the real competition. Maybe the real competition is the TV set. And our job is to get people off the couch and out the door to enjoy life with their family and friends. If we do a good enough job and our other restaurant neighbors do a good enough job, people will go out more often, they'll come to this area more frequently, and there will be a rising tide. And they thought I was crazy. But I went down, I got to know either the owners or the general managers at the other restaurants. We started buying pint glasses together. We had the Lower Downtown Brewers Festival. Well, you know, in 1991, there were only about 7, craft brewers in the entire state of Colorado. But we got them all to send beer, And we set up a big long table, and we made a big weekend event out of it and got local musicians to play. We really pushed that collaborative idea and got the Denver Post to sponsor it. So we got a bunch of ads, and all of a sudden that led to all of us restaurants advertising together and talking about, instead of calling it Lower Downtown, we started calling it, oops. I'm not sure what this is really supposed to do, but I figure it should stay here. We decided that creating a sense of place and calling it Lodo would really have more impact. So suddenly we started working on all these things, and we all took, I mean, we were all kids. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing, but we all said also, we don't want to have nightclubs, we don't want to be staying open all night, because we want people to live down here in these old warehouses that, by this time, you know, New York and Philadelphia and Boston had been converting warehouses to lofts for probably a better part of a decade. But it hadn't happened really very much in the West. We took that as our opportunity to say, this is how we're going to get people to live here. We took the upper 3 floors of the wine coop and turned them into condominiums. We sold them. I was the developer, and I did it for cost, for no money at all. We put the pool hall on the 2nd floor. That was going to be our cherry in the deal for us. And I can't even tell you how much financing battles there were. But we got up to the upper 3 floors, and I pre-sold all 3 floors, 15 condominiums, for $62 a square foot. Right? For that they got a bathroom, 8 feet of counters in the kitchen, and a closet. Everything else was just the warehouse with a floor and walls. And we pre-sold all 15, and that was my money, my principal, my capital to do the deal. And so the bank wouldn't give me a loan. They said, well, you don't have any money. I said, well, I got the 10% down, non-refundable on all these, it's $1.5 million. He goes, yeah, but if something goes wrong, you have no capacity to deal with it. I said, well, but we are the real pioneers down here. We're reclaiming the downtown. We're going to make it a walkable downtown. We're going to make it the center of what the city is going to become. I mean, we're the true pioneers. And Doug Price, my banker, who now runs the public television out here, Doug Price looked at me and says, John, you know what we bankers say. Pioneers get the arrows, settlers get the land. So we went, in that same sense of collaboration, we got all 15 purchasers to co-sign jointly and severally, right? And there were 2 or 3 very wealthy people. The woman who owned the tattered cover was one of our purchasers, software guy. Jointly and severally, the $1.8 million construction loan that was going to make this thing happen. And it was this wonderful catharsis that people would be willing to take risks together if they were covering their sides. And Lodo became the last missing link in terms of what Denver really needed. Mayor Pena had already laid out the plans for building an airport. Mayor Webb built the airport. Now, it did have a bad baggage system, if you remember, and opened a year late. But it was a $4.5 billion investment that many people here thought would be the ruin of the city's financial future, and it was just the opposite. Same with the convention center. The convention center was brought together, imagined by Pena, completed by Mayor Webb, and we looked at, and still look at, the convention business and tourism as the front door of economic development. And we knew that we were a boom and bust cycle historically. What we really needed to do was have a real diversity of industries, but also bring in young entrepreneurs and other small businesses. Denver, it's hard to attract a Fortune 500 headquarters. We've had a few of them come. Arrow Electronics, $20 billion a year company, moved here 3 years ago, and DaVita, a $10 billion a year healthcare company, moved here 5 years ago. But generally, we've focused on taking that quality of life, and the convention center allowed us to open all these other restaurants. People, my employees, my partners couldn't believe I was so supportive of the Convention Bureau and really fostering, when you get big conventions coming to your city all the time, all those people have to go eat. So it allows you to have many more restaurants and much higher quality restaurants than you otherwise would be able to have. We saw that as a way to attract young entrepreneurs and small businesses. And so I ran for mayor in 2003, and that's a much longer story, but really just to show that small business principles could work in government and that good government would sell and innovation could thrive in that area. And then I ran for governor. Really, I was the first mayor of Denver in 150 years to be elected governor of Colorado. And the animosity was so great between the downtown city and the suburbs. and between the metro area and the rest of the state that no mayor, I think only 2 had even tried in the last 50 years. But our whole premise of the campaign, our whole vision was the city is only going to be as good as its suburbs, and I'd worked very hard as mayor to make sure the city was helping all the suburbs, that we were united. We passed in 2004 what's called fast tracks, which was 0.4 cent sales tax increase for the whole metropolitan area that would build 119 miles of new track, the largest transit initiative in the history of the country, and we got all 34 mayors. 2/3 of them were Republicans from smaller communities, but all 34 mayors in the metropolitan area to unanimously support the passage of fast tracks. And we passed it almost 60-40. Those kinds of collaborative investments have been what allowed us to go after, when I became governor, to go after small businesses, entrepreneurs, and try and make this the best state in America for business, right? With high standards, right? The Rocky Mountain splendor is a key asset that we can never compromise, but we've cut red tape, dramatically reduced rules and regulations, again, always with high standards, but with that premise that we want to make sure we're the place if some young entrepreneur is on the East Coast or the West Coast or anywhere, Atlanta, Chicago, if they're thinking about where they might want to not just build a business, but build a life, they're going to want to do it in Colorado. So that's the basic frame. I could go on for a long time, but I suspect we would have a better time if you just asked me some questions.
Thank you very much for your remarks. And I have to say, I'm really enjoying meeting you because my niece, Adrienne Russman, works for you on your staff. So.
She sure does. She also went to Wesleyan, where I went.
I know that. I know that.
She had an inside route to get into the administration.
I know that. So she's told me so much about you.
She's awesome.
I saw a bumper sticker recently. It was in Berkeley, California, but I think it could have been in Denver. And the bumper sticker said, "Subvert the dominant paradigm." And it really sounds like you've been doing that a lot in Denver and in Colorado. But I'd like to hear your thoughts not just on how you've subverted the dominant paradigm in business, but also in leadership, because that's our theme here, in terms of your personal leadership, both as an entrepreneur and as governor.
I guess subvert the dominant paradigm is very...
Not just following the conventional path.
Right, no, I got it.
Yeah, okay.
It's not just thinking outside the box, but acting outside the box, which I think is what Fred's about to a large extent as well. I think, I think the only governor in America that went to Woodstock. I've always looked at life in terms of what does it really offer, and what is the point of being on this planet, and how can you make things better? And people always think about the 60s and Woodstock and that whole social upheaval, and often forget that the real focus of it was how to make a better world. That's what all the people that weren't out there smoking pot, although that happens plenty in Colorado now, as you know, but that it was how do you make a better world? And I think we looked at city government. One of the things I ran on there was a year and a half before I ran for mayor, there was a pretty serious recession. This was in about 2001, 2000. It was right when the dot-coms all collapsed. And so the city had to raise revenue somehow, so they raised parking meter rates by 50%. And a bunch of us restaurateurs and downtown retailers went in and said, you can't do this. I know that's the way you do things. When revenues go down, you raise fees or taxes somewhere. But no business would do that. If our revenues go down, we don't raise our prices. Don't force us to raise the cost of business coming down into downtown Denver. You'll just help the outlying business districts and the suburbs. And they listened very patiently and then went ahead and did it anyway. And so I did a TV ad when I ran for mayor of, there was we had this great kind of a character actor who had quite a large paunch, and he had, he was writing tickets and putting them on people's windshields. And I came up with a little change-making machine and put the quarter in the parking meter just before he could write the ticket, which turned out to be illegal in some way. I can't remember exactly what the problem was. But it was subverting a paradigm, right? To make the sense that when your revenues go down, when government's revenues go down, they can't just go the way they've always done things and raise fees and taxes. That's counterproductive. And we did that TV ad about 7 weeks before the election. I think the highest I'd gotten to was 4% in the polls. There were 7 other people running for this open seat. And that ad caught fire, largely because it was subverting a paradigm. And I think the way really productive change, and disruption is the current topic in vogue. It's a more common way of saying, how can you disrupt various industries? But disruption is almost subvert is also not the right word. We need to find the right word, because there is a word for that kind of dramatically transformative change that occurs that is really positive. It doesn't have all the negative attributes that you think of when you think of disruption or subversion. What else? One of the things we had was that was disrupting a little bit or subverting the traditional paradigm was that government and culture didn't have that big a connection to business. And so when the community, and this was before I'd even opened my restaurant, they did the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District in 1986. I was really convinced that culture really did play a role. I've always loved music. And so when I became mayor, I campaigned on this fact that if we could be one of the top places for painters and for musicians to come and really embrace them, celebrate them, hold them up high, the kids who are going to write code for the internet, and Richard Florida wrote a book called The Rise of the Creative Class that kind of planted all these seeds, but that we could attract, again, those entrepreneurs. And it has been amazingly successful now that there's a new band, actually he's been here for a long time, but a guy named Nathaniel Rateliff. Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats is his new band. They released their record about 3 weeks ago. But if you go back to your hotel room and Google Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats and Jimmy Fallon, and you'll see his 4-minute piece that was 4 weeks ago. They have exploded. They're global right now. They're, I think, in the top 10 on iTunes, top 10 sellers on iTunes. Well, that's the 4th year in a row that we've had a global band. The Lumineers, that song Hey Ho that came out 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, that's a Denver band. They came out from New York. They loved the collaborative. They felt all the other musicians were helping them succeed. The Fray, One Republic, that song Counting Stars from 3.5 years ago, they're a Denver band. So we've pushed that as a way to, and we celebrate them, right? We did an album release party for Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats at the governor's mansion. And you tell me how often that happens in America. And yet, it's a way of letting the whole community know that music is important and that we really care about it. And I think that's a paradigm that, in terms, we don't have to put money into it, right? We're not writing checks to these bands or these musicians, but we are making sure Denver has a music teacher in every school, right? So we make sure that people are appreciating music, and then we are celebrating those people that are investing their lives into, creative enterprises. Yeah.
Yes. So your name has come up over and over again as a potential candidate for president. And I think some of us in the room, a lot of us in the room, wish you would consider that.
Thank you.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on the current presidential races and how you see it all happening now.
I feel like I want to do the howl. Donald Trump is saying something that not just Republicans, but a lot of people are responding to. And I think there's a tremendous frustration that we have all these laws that aren't being obeyed, that there's this kind of vacuum in our society, and the middle class really is getting left behind. He's saying the wrong things, but I am old enough that I remember laughing when Ronald Reagan first threw his name out in 1972, and then when he put his name in, formally kind of ran in the primaries in 1976 and did nothing, or very little, but made a couple of interesting speeches. And then when he was going to run again in 1980, I said, why is that guy wasting his time? And the interesting thing is, you go back, and will probably alienate some people in the room, he did some remarkable things as president. Right? I mean, he was not as partisan as everyone thought he would be. Certainly his international stuff, how he dealt with Gorbachev and Russia, very I think, very, very interesting. I think he did some remarkable things. So I don't ever rule Trump out. I mean, like the rest of you, I look at what he's saying, and it makes my blood run cold, right? Very fearful. And I look at the rest of the Republican side, and I'm not very partisan. I've hired as many Republicans as Democrats. I'm a Democrat, but I try to be as nonpartisan as I can. But there's not anyone there, with maybe the exception of Governor Kasich or Governor Bush, but most of them I don't think have the background to really step in and run the country. Not that other people haven't come in with insufficient backgrounds and done great jobs. Hillary Clinton, I do think could run the country, although I don't know where this whole thing's going to go in terms of her, you know, how often they are able to keep this issue around the server, and whether there's something in there that really is going to turn out to be, you know, have broken the law, which I think would be a death knell. So it's kind of grim, to be blunt. We'll see. I am happy, being very focused on making Colorado the #1 model for how a state can be run and how you can make, even in these difficult times, you know, you can make government work. And I do, in terms of what we're going to see in this campaign coming right up now, so 2016, we will see the worst attack ads ever. I think we're already seeing them in Colorado. We've got a couple of just very bleak television ads, and they now are up on social media. And I talk all the time in the campaign seasons about how destructive attack ads and negative campaigning is. And the metaphor I use, you never see it, or rarely see it, in private enterprise. You don't see Coca-Cola doing attack ads against Pepsi. And let me tell you, those two companies hate each other. I mean, they really do. It's visceral. But if Coke did an attack ad against Pepsi, Pepsi's sales would go down. Pepsi would have no choice but to do an attack ad back against Coke. Coke's sales would go down. Coke would do an attack ad against Pepsi. Pepsi would do an attack ad against Coke. They would diminish sales in the entire product category of soft drinks. What we're doing as a country is we are diminishing the product category of democracy. And what's happening is we're turning people off, right? We're turning, especially young people, and they just won't read and go into the policy issues in sufficient depth, and that is the death knell. I mean, that is I mean, this is, for all its flaws, I do believe American democracy is the best form of government ever invented, but it is fragile, and this is a real point of fragility, is people have to invest their time to learn.
I'd like to ask you something more local. I know as mayor you had an awful lot to do with the Denver public school system, and I'm sort of curious now as governor how you look at that work, and particularly how you think about the school system for poor kids and black and brown kids here in Denver. Sure.
Well, if you want to talk about attracting entrepreneurs and businesses to come to your community, you better have a good public school system, because, you know, price of a home and the ability, how bad your traffic is, your mobility, those are big things, but most people care a little more about education system. And Colorado, I think we've passed some things that are going to pay some pretty big dividends. We are a low-tax state, and we've tried to put an initiative to get more money for education, about $1 billion a year. We've tried, that initiative lost almost 65 to 35. It was 3 years ago. I mean, this is a very conservative state in terms of taxes, so we've done everything we can with the resources we have. In Colorado, no matter where you live, you can go to any school. And the schools can give priority to those closest, so if they fill up with their people in their neighborhood, then there's no room for you. But it's competitive, so even within school districts, different schools are competing with each other. We now are having, this winter we will have up a website, so every single school will have to post how much money they are spending in each area. So how much goes to teachers, how much goes to the building, how much goes to the administration, the superintendent, the bureaucracy that runs the school district. And you want to give parents power, give them that kind of information. So that's a big part of it. I also think that Denver was, in 2005, we passed the first pay for performance measure that allowed teachers to be compensated and get bonuses when they can really demonstrate how well they're succeeding. We have one of the most charter-friendly systems in the country. So we have some amazing charter school networks that are growing up, which I honestly do believe will help make the public schools better. My son Teddy is 13 and goes to public school. It's called an innovation school. But instead of 6.5 hours a day, they have 8 hours a day. Right? So he's in 8th grade. And it's, instead of 185 days a year, or 182 days after you do the training days, he has 207 days, but no homework. And let me tell you, you want to transform my life, his life, whatever, take that homework out of there so you're not nagging him all the time. And that school is the 3rd best school for math, 4th best school for social studies in Denver, and the 6th and the 8th best in the state. And so we're experimenting with those oops, there it goes again. I'll let it down, so I'll get it at the end. But you want to figure out a way to make schools better, really support innovation and those kinds of ideas. And we're looking right now at that kind of longer school day, longer school year, no homework calculus is something that, I mean, Teddy's school is 50% free and reduced lunch, and those kids are doing really well.
Last question, Todd. Sorry.
Hi. I'm Todd Breifogel with the Aspen Institute, but I'm a Colorado native and a neighbor of yours from Park Hill. So just a personal note, thanks for making this such a great state and city in which to live. But a follow-on question about education. I love it that you have an English degree. I love it that Rocky has an English degree. The Aspen Institute was originally founded as the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies. You talked a lot about culture earlier. How do you think about the relationship between the humanities and humanistic learning and leadership, particularly in an era that emphasizes STEM so much?
Right. Well, I mean, there's two sides of that question. So our society does emphasize STEM so much, but we don't have anywhere near the number of students getting degrees in STEM. So we have to emphasize STEM just because it's harder. We are in a generation of, and have been for 20, 30, 40 years, of immediate gratification. Increasingly, young people want to have something that they can touch in real time. One of the most daunting statistics I know that I've heard in the last year is that the average elementary school student has between 6 and 9 minutes a day of unstructured free time outside. They spend 6 to 8 hours a day looking at some sort of a screen, right? A television screen, a computer screen, an iPad, a cell phone, whatever. That should chill the blood of every person in this room. And STEM is harder. If you're kind of spending a lot of time playing video games and using the things made from STEM people, it's going to be hard to get yourself to the point where you're willing to work hard enough to get an engineering degree. It's just hard work. So that's why they're emphasizing it. That being said, a liberal arts degree, to me, what your high school and college degree should do is teach you how to learn. It doesn't really matter what you learn then. There's a guy here in town named Greg Maffei, who's the CEO of Liberty Media. And they own Sirius Radio, satellite radio, they own the Atlanta Braves, they own all these media assets, about $45 billion. He was a religion major in college. He went to Dartmouth and, got a degree in religious studies. The point, and he'd be the first to make it, is what you have to learn is how to take information, organize it in your mind, be able to access it, and use it in ways to subvert the existing paradigms and use it in new ways and creative ways. And I think liberal arts does a better way is more successful at teaching that kind of a skill than just about anything else. Not to say you can't go into physics or mathematics and also learn how to organize information and then use creative approaches to think of something in a different light. But liberal arts is getting trashed all the time, and certainly their funding is getting cut. But that's just because we do need more STEM people. It should in no way ever diminish the importance, and certainly in terms of citizenship and how we make sure we don't elect Don Trump, right? Better liberal arts will go a long way towards making sure that people understand that what he says very earnestly could be a disaster if it was ever actually put into policy. You guys have a great time in Colorado. Enjoy yourselves.